Take two. Thank you for taking time to watch this endorsement demo. We will be talking about a few different types of changes today. So I will be showing name changes, coverage detail changes for scheduled items, as well as an out-of-sequence mortgage change and a cancellation transaction. We'll also be discussing the different types of messaging that you should be familiar with in our system. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and walk through the name change with you guys. This is one that tends to cause some confusion, so it's definitely worth walking through or pointing out. So here I am. I have a policy selected. I'm on the History tab. I'm going to move over to the Policy tab to start this transaction. Transaction is actually an option under the Actions menu on the left side of the page. When we click on Transaction, we get this Transaction Selection tile, which gives us the drop-down, and we're going to select Endorsement. Click on the Select button, and the Transaction Selection tile expands, asking for the effective date of the change. In this case, we're going to make this change effective 10/26/16, and select Start. You'll need to double-click that Start button, so just be mindful of that. Now, whenever we begin a transaction, we see that an application actually gets created. So an application number has been assigned here. This is a copy of the original policy. This process so far is the same thing. These are the same steps that we would take for quoting an enforced policy. If we just wanted to get an idea about a revised deductible, we're going to create this application. In that instance, we'd actually be deleting it. Here, we're going to move forward with our name change. So this looks very similar to the way that it does in New Business. It's actually exactly the same, and the navigation really isn't any different. So I can just click on this policy chevron and move forward, or I can select Next Page in my upper right-hand corner or the bottom of my screen. I prefer to jump the chevron. So now we see the policy chevron is highlighted in orange, and I have my fields open for my insured's name. In this example, we have an individual insured listed. So if we wanted to just update this insured's last name, let's say the insured's gotten married, we move to the last name field, and we update the information there. But that is not all it takes to make this change. What you actually need to do is hit this Reset button next to the name field. This is what's actually going to update the named insured. All right. So once we hit a save on the page, you'll also notice that in the application summary, the name is being updated and your change is reflected. So those are the steps that you'd walk through if we were just updating the insured's last name. If we wanted to add a second named insured or put this policy in the name of the estate of the insured, what you actually need to do is first update your entity type. So let's add the spouse. We're going to go ahead and change this entity type to joint. And we see that we now have name fields for a co-applicant. So I'm going to put in the first and last name for our co-insured. And again, just updating these fields in itself is not going to update the named insured as it reads on this policy. It is this name field down here that is dictating the way the named insured displays. So once we've made our updates, we're going to hit Reset and save. Oh, it looks like it doesn't like my insured date of birth, which makes sense. So we see that our named insured has now updated, and we would want to finalize this transaction, which of course takes us to our closeout screen, where we're going to see one of two things happen whenever you initiate a change in our system. Either you're going to have the authority to go ahead and just process that change right now in real time, in which case you'd see Endorse as an option on the closeout screen. Or if Underwriting needs to review and approve the change. You see the option to submit for approval. In this case, you see we have this workflow comments tile at the bottom of the page. Something's unbound. Might be helpful to just provide some detail explaining the scenario. So in this case, the insured got married, and we probably just want to let the underwriting team know that to eliminate any back and forth about the change. And we can go ahead and submit it for approval. And we see now in our recent list that that application is owned by underwriting. It's under review. Underwriting will go in and finalize that transaction, get it processed, and you'll be notified that the change has gone through when that happens. The next change type that I want to show you guys is what I call a coverage detail change. So this is the type of change where we're adding an endorsement or coverage that we need a description for. So I have a policy here. I'm going to go ahead and move again to the policy tab and start my transaction. Select endorsement from the transaction selection tile and click that select button. Put in the effective date of my change and a double click of the start button. Okay, so here the change that I want to make is to add some scheduled items. So I'm going to jump right to the coverages chevron. Again, I could have next page at the bottom of the screen or in the upper right hand corner to get here. Fastest way really is just to jump to where the information lives. So I already have some scheduled items listed on this policy. I'm going to go ahead and select change from the coverage list. If I want to add a new item, I can simply select add new item. There'll be a drop down to select the type of item you're going to be insuring. So go ahead and put jewelry. Put in my description, the coverage amount. In the case of jewelry, we like to know if it's in vault or not. I'm going to say no and hit save. All right, so I've added my item, but I have not completed my change. To navigate out of the coverage detail tile, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have an option to return, which takes you back to your coverage list. Okay, the next step to complete the transaction is to actually select Finalize Transaction under the Action menu, which takes us to our closeout screen. In this case, this change is in my authority, and so I have the option to endorse the policy. This is going to happen right now in real time. The update has occurred. And a copy of the declaration page will attach to the policy file that will get sent to the insured automatically. So depending on their delivery preference, they'll either get an email or a mailed deck page. We could also, if we needed to, go into the policy, select the policy file, and get a copy of that endorsement declaration. Okay, the next change I'd like to walk through with you guys is an out-of-sequence mortgagee update. So I have a policy that I'm going to pull up, which has renewed. So we have to play pretend here on this one. Notice our dates. In this scenario that I want to walk through with you guys, I'm going to make a mortgagee change effective October 4th of 2017, which is before the renewal date. If I just move to the policy tab, I'm updating the most recently issued version of the policy. So if I go to the policy tab and select transaction here, I'd be working on the policy effective 10/26/17. I want to work on the prior term. And so to do that, I have to select that term. So Here, to the left of the transactions and the transaction history, you notice this term sequence number. You'll click on the term that you want to update. Notice that when you've selected it, it will highlight in yellow. Now I'm ready to make a change to the version of this policy effective 10/26/16 through 17. I'm going to move to the policy tab now, start my transaction. From the transaction selection tile, select endorsement from the drop-down and hit select. My change is effective 10/4/17, and I'm going to double-click that start button. Notice this message. It's telling me this transaction also applies to the renewal. It's letting me know that making this change here is also going to make a change to the renewal policy. All right? I'm going to go ahead and hit start. For mortgagees or any additional interest type, they get added on this additional interest chevron. Okay? So this processing is the same actually for mortgagee, an additional insured, and additional interest. We move to the additional interest chevron. And from the Actions menu, we're selecting Add an Additional Interest. We get this additional interest detail, which has an interest type drop-down. And we're just going to go ahead and select the first mortgagee in this case. I'm going to let you guys know, this first field appears for searching for a mortgagee in the database. Our database actually is not housing mortgagees just yet. So for now, we'll just key in the information that we need. It's asking me for a loan number. I'm going to go ahead and key that in. This forms, you don't have to worry about this forms field. This is really for when there's an additional interest or an additional insured listed on the policy. The form associated with that endorsement will automatically default there. In this case, I'm just adding the bank. All right, and I'll put in the address. I've got a little house icon here to validate the address. I'm just going to hit save. So now, I've added the mortgagee, but the transaction is not finished. If I have additional changes or something else I need to work on in the app, I can return. In this case, if all I needed to do was add that mortgagee information, I can just finalize transaction. And again, I'm going to be taken to the closeout screen where I can just endorse the policy, and this change is happening in real time. So really, any change request that you might have should be initiated in the key in this way. There's not a need to send an email to request a change on a policy anymore. They really need to be initiated in the system for the cleanest processing. Now, that mortgagee change that we just made, notice the policy, it updated the current version, and we just need to apply the change to the renewal as well. So I'm selecting Apply, Finalize Transaction, Endorse the policy. So the reason that we see that change to the renewal is unapplied is the system wants to make sure that the change makes sense to apply to the renewal. It doesn't mean that you can't proceed with your change. It really is just kind of giving you an opportunity to make sure that that update is supposed to be happening all the way across the board. Okay. For any change that's processed on the policy, you can kind of get an idea about what it was on the transaction history. So this is a good resource for you guys. Notice these little plus signs as you expand them. You can get details of the change that has occurred within a given transaction. So just another little helpful tidbit. If I wanted to see the policy details, let's say, for the policy before this endorsement occurred, then I would just select the term that I want to see. Notice it's highlighting in yellow, and then move into the policy details. Now I can see what the new business version of this policy looks like. Notice in the policy summary it's telling me it's not current. So again, just another little useful tidbit for version selection. If I don't select a version, then I'm going into the most recent version. In this case, it would be this 2.2 endorsement. All right, so this is kind of the default. It won't highlight in yellow by default. If I just were to move to the policy chevron, I'm automatically looking at this unless I've selected some other term. All right, now the next type of transaction I'd like to walk through with you guys is a cancellation. So I have a policy set up that I'd like to cancel. Get it to pull up here. All right, here we go. And the processing is very similar to the endorsement transaction. We're just going to select transaction here. Cancellation from the drop-down, not cancellation notice. You guys at the agency actually won't have the ability to create a cancellation notice. Probably shouldn't need to. Most cancellations you'll process are insured requested. So here in the transaction selection tile, I am putting in my cancellation type as insured. The reason defaults to insured, and I'll just hit add next to that drop-down. All right. We're always going to do a prorated cancellation even if we're canceling the policy as of the effective date. So just be mindful of that. And we put in the effective date of cancel, start. And we're taken right to a closeout screen. It's really as simple as that to cancel the policy. We just hit process here. Now I will let you know, guys, if your cancellation effective date is more than 30 days in the past, it will create an unbound application to underwriting. In that case, you would want to attach a copy of the cancellation deck to the policy file. All right, so that's processing. That's actually going to generate a cancel deck that it's, again, attaching to the policy file. We see the policy here has been canceled out. So again, we're just putting all of the changeability in your hands, at least from the standpoint of initiating changes. They really should be starting in the system. Even if they're outside of your authority, this is the cleanest way to start the submission processes. No changes can really get lost if you're submitting them through the key. All right, the next thing that I wanted to touch on with you guys is just looking at some error messages. So I have a policy that I set up for this customer that already has an application pending with some different types of error messages triggered on it. So here's my pending application. I'm going to go ahead and just select it. And right away, I'm landing on this transaction tile. And you see that I've got a few different things going on. So these first two messages that we're seeing are called validation review messages. They have an orange triangle with an exclamation point. That's how you know that it's a validation review. What that means is that a condition has been triggered that is going to cause underwriting to look at the policy. In this case, we've added some coverages that underwriting likes to look at when they're attached. These conditions, however, do not necessarily mean that the policy is unbound. So just be mindful of that. If it has an exclamation point, orange exclamation point, it is not necessarily stopping you. It's just letting you know that underwriting is interested in reviewing the app. The next type of message is, of course, going to be the unbound message. All right, those are yellow with a check mark. Whenever the addition of a coverage or the type of transaction you're trying to process is unbound, you're going to see the word unbound clearly stated. Just know that. There's a distinction between a review message, which is just a warning, and an unbound message. With a review message, if that's all you have going on in the application, coverage will be bound. Underwriting will just be circling back to look at the coverage. If the coverage is unbound, that'll be clearly stated when you finalize the transaction on the closeout screen, and it'll be, you'll have this yellow icon with the check mark. Okay, I want to touch on one more message type for you guys, and this is going to be the hard stop error, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and let's add some inland flood coverage to this policy. 20,000 sounds good. When I hit save, notice a red X. You can't continue. When you trigger one of these errors, we're letting you know that something needs to be corrected or something is really not allowed. So in this case, when there's no water backup coverage on the policy, I can't have more than 10,000 inland flood. So let's just say 10,000. Going to hit save. Now I've cleared out that error, and we look, good to proceed. And I can finalize my transaction. This is where we'll see any review messages as well as any unbound messages on an application. Okay, so if you get an orange exclamation, it doesn't mean that you have to stop in your tracks. Doesn't even mean that you need to give us a call. Just means underwriting is going to be taking a look. If you get the yellow check mark, coverage is going to be unbound, and in those situations, on closeout, you have to submit for approval. All right, so those were the 3 just distinct messaging types that I wanted to review with you guys. I'm going to go ahead and hit return. Actually, let's finish this up. Again, with unbound apps, you'd want to use the workflow comments to let the underwriter know of anything that might help them make their decision, and you'd just be submitting for approval. Once that change gets processed, underwriting will be in communication about whether or not the change is acceptable. All right, that's everything we wanted to cover with you guys today. Again, thank you for taking time out to watch this demo. And happy endorsement processing.